Amazingly, Alex Younger, former head of MI6, is still here, despite the fact I mucked up the start of the programme. What I wanted to talk to you about was, we heard from Marco Rubio today that he hopes that on the basis of these talks between Ukrainian and Ukrainian and American officials that are taking place in Saudi, I think they start tomorrow, these talks, he's hopeful that Trump's ban on military aid to Ukraine, including incredibly important sort of intelligence that's supplied by America, also cut off, can be reinstated. What do you think, however, the Americans are expecting from Ukraine in these initial talks that would persuade Trump to change his mind?
Well, look, I mean, against the background of the conversation you've just been having, this is going to be an uphill struggle. Fundamentally, Trump buys the sort of Putin view that big countries get to call their shots in their own backyard, which is basically what Putin is saying the Ukraine war is about. Trump's doing it, of course, in a completely different way, but he buys into this idea of strong men and deals and spheres of influence. So,
and you've made the point that Trump thinks that, for example, land, in his sense, property, is an important bargaining chip here.
Yeah.
And that implies that Ukraine will have to say to these negotiators, they will hand over land.
Yes.
But should Ukrainian negotiators do that?
Look, the issue, as I've said before, is that's not the main issue. That's precisely why this has got stuck. I honestly think Trump meant it when he said he thought he could end this at day one, because it's just a land for peace deal. We're gonna sort it out mano a mano, done. It's much more complicated than that. When Putin started this war, he was super clear. He was setting out to constrain the sovereignty of Ukraine and to constrain the sovereignty of all Eastern European countries that used to be in the Soviet sphere of influence. Sovereignty. It's about sovereignty. Now,
it's about the autonomy of Ukraine.
So just to put it in practical terms, Russia will now be pushing for Ukraine not to have a military, not to have alliances, not to have a foreign policy, to have a veto on its leadership. Now, this is a disaster because...
But do we have any sense of where the Americans are on this?
Well, I think that it will be a disaster if those things are conceded. I think I've already said that I don't really think it's in Donald Trump's mind. It's still a territory thing. The reason this is going on so long is that Ukraine can't concede their existence as a state.
No.
Because otherwise, that's it. Putin's being vindicated. So I am worried about this because I can't see the landing zone that exists. I actually think the Prime Minister's taking the right track. He's pushing it in exactly as far as he can. He's making the case really well. But I think this has got a long way to go.
I mean, if one was to slightly, and we are now in the realms of speculation, it sounds as though what you're saying is it is certainly conceivable that the Americans will come away saying, yep, they're prepared to give up some land, but not sovereignty. And, of course, Putin just will reject that.
Yeah, but that's a win for Ukraine. So that would be my advice to Ukraine. They've got to take the initiative. I mean, I, of course, am been consistent in my support for Ukraine from the get-go, from before the get-go. But the reality is they've really suffered since their failed counter-offensive from a lack of a really clear idea of what their idea of victory is. They've got to be super clear about this. And that's what they've got to assert. And it's not just that we're going to go back to 91 borders and join NATO. It's obviously much more complicated than that. Now, if they can do that in this meeting, sufficient for the Americans to say they've got something to put to Russia, then it's flipped. Ukraine's calling the shots. It's Russia who's being the obstruction. That is an intrinsically better place for us to get to. And it's a much better place that Europe is a much easier thing for Europe to support.
It's a much
that is the best outcome from these talks.
Do we have any reason to believe that if that were to happen, Trump would, in a sense, change sides at that point, reinforce Ukraine and try and punish Putin?
Well, look, hope's not a plan, obviously.
Yeah.
But the thing that I'm finding frustrating is that Trump, I think, has far more power than even he realizes. Putin only has one plan, which is to flatter Trump into giving him what he wants. If Trump has given Putin hope he's a spy. He should understand that if you make hope conditional, that's how you do a negotiation. So he needs to make it clear to Putin that Putin could be rehabilitated, but only if he moves and he retreats from his maximalist demands. Then we might be in some kind of negotiation. But at the moment, I think Putin will just push it really hard.
If, and I think from what you're saying, and I'm very hard to disagree with you, very hard to a genuine peace deal, as you say, looks remote. But if we were to have something that looks like a peace deal in, I don't know, months' time, many months' time, as it were, if you look at Putin's behaviour, his entire career, but certainly since the war in Ukraine starts more than 10 years ago, 11 years ago, he breaks every treaty, bit of paper that he signs. There's no chance that he'll honour this one, is there?
No, which is why there is such an emphasis on security guarantees. Honestly, I think, though, I think Britain and France have done the right thing by sincerely demonstrating that they're prepared to put skin in the game. That's a very different European conversation to what we had. I think that's right.
Yep.
But
we still can't do it without the backing of America.
Yeah, no, but
we can't preserve the peace.
Yeah, exactly, but it's more than that. There are no circumstances in which it would ever be wise to put European soldiers into Ukraine unless there is a peace deal. So we've already talked about that. I think that's quite a long way away. And I think it would be, as the Prime Minister evidently does, irresponsible to do that without strategic support from the US, because we don't have those capabilities. So the reality is this stuff is, I think, really quite distant, even if it's completely correct and right for Europe to demonstrate that it's willing to change and put skin in the game and do stuff.
And then I want to bring James and Emily in a minute on a particular issue. But one of the things that deeply troubled many of us when Trump withheld support from Ukraine is whether there was an implication there that if a NATO country were attacked, we could any longer count on America under Trump to honour Article 5 and, in a sense, come to the rescue. How worried should we be?
Well, look, I think clearly Article 5 has now got a transactional component to it that may not have been there before. It's
a what's in it for us in America.
Well, no, Trump said that you basically get, you get out what you've paid in, and if you're not putting stuff into, that's been coming for a while. I also think, by the way, that the huge long-term mega trend that we're dealing with is the reduction in the US's ability to police the world. So this was coming anyway. So there are issues here. We shouldn't usher them into being early. But the best thing we can do by a country mile is what we are doing. And it's these events in Germany were borderline miraculous on this score. Finally, we've worked it out. We have got responsibility for our own security. And guess what? This won't alienate the Americans. It will encourage them because we will have an adult relationship. We've become infantilized in our security dependencies here. And we've got to build them up. And this isn't someone who wants strategic autonomy for Europe. I just want us to be able to look after our own security. Because in this new world, in this Trumpian Putin world, hard power is what matters. And Europe's got to get its hard power gene back.
Totally right. And actually, this is something where I do want to bring in Emily and James. Hard power obviously matters, but many of us would argue that soft power also matters and is no less relevant than it was. Keir Starmer has made a decision to reduce our soft power for a number of years by reducing our aid budget. Is that the right kind of trade-off, that we should cut our soft power to increase our hard power?
Look, I don't welcome, and I'm sure Keir Starmer does not either, cutting aid, even though some of it was not well spent. A lot of it was really important. But I take issue with you, Robert. Hard power is more important than soft power.
No, I wasn't. No. I wasn't saying they weren't both important, but you genuinely think hard power now is way more important than soft power.
At this moment, what is going to keep our country safe?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Emily, when I was slightly teasing you at the beginning of the programme, what I was referring to was the fact that you have raised questions about the cut in the aid budget. I mean, do you think there is any possibility that Keir Starmer will find a way of softening these cuts?
He keeps talking about finding a new way of getting money into the areas that we need. So he says that he's talking to the World Bank, he's talking to other countries. We need to find different ways of getting aid to many of the countries that need it. I don't know what the details of that are, and that's the kind of questions that need to be asked. I also am concerned that our overseas aid budget has been used a great deal for asylum hotels. You know, more than a third of the ODA budget has been spent on that. And obviously, if we cut it by more than half, but we have to continue to pay for then, you know, you can do the math. I mean, so there's very little left. And then he says that he wants to continue with the priorities that will be Ukraine and Gaza and what was the third one?
Sudan.
Sudan, thank you. But would there even be sufficient money for that? And then we have to stop and think, well, even if there is, does that then mean that this is the time when Britain abandons the rest of Africa or South America or all the other countries where we have been involved and we've had a deep interest? And is it the time when we walk away and we leave it to China?
No, it's important. Now, James, when you were Foreign Secretary, you were a great champion of Britain's soft power. But, I mean, is Alex right that at this particular juncture, in the end, tough choices have to be made? It is about increasing essentially the military hard power, and if something has to give, it will just have to be the aid budget.
So I'm going to pull you up on your definition, because you're suggesting that our official development assistance, our ODA budget, is soft power. I never bought into that.
Didn't you?
No. So the projects that we funded in small Pacific islands that we're going to have to withdraw, that's going to be filled now by China.
Yeah.
So when I went to the Solomon Islands to try and persuade them not to be quite so intimate in their relationship with China, I had a foot in the door because of our ODA budget. That's hard power. When we pull money from Africa, where critical minerals
I think we're agreeing with each other. I'm not disagreeing with a word you say.
No, but the point is, the development money is hard power. It's not soft power. And that's the point I'm making. And also, the budget is tiny. Flipping less than 0.1% from our development budget to our defence budget is nowhere near enough. We need to be spending a load more on defence. We need it to be spent much more quickly. And actually, there is a conversation which I think we're going to go on to later, because actually we need to look at the big areas of government expenditure, and we need to take our defence expenditure much more seriously. I pushed for this, and I wasn't the only one. I pushed for this when I was in government. We have always been very much at the front end of our defence, of our support for Ukraine's defence. We need to be able to continue doing that. And Alex is absolutely right. When we have conversations with President Trump and the American administration, we need to show that we are pulling our weight and then some, because that is how we buy credibility. So whether it's defence spending, whether it's development spending, whether it's our diplomatic spending, when it's spending our intelligence and security agencies, none of this is soft power. This is buying influence on the world stage.
Sure.
And as we discussed in the opening...
I think you and I agree about this.
That is more important.
I'm being told annoyingly that we've got to go to the break, so I'm going to come back to both of you in a minute. I'm going to say thanks so much to Alex, as always. A treat and unbelievably interesting. After the break, much more about Trump, and we're also going to talk about the government's controversial welfare reforms. So see you in a minute. Be sure to like, subscribe and turn on all post notifications to catch the ills, spills and thrills of the mad, mad world of politics.